Yo, I'm live. It is incredible. It took this long, certainly not on time, but I am live. Like most people may be right about this time, you had to wait until the biggest game of the year, whether pro or college, was over with. And that's Alabama taking on Georgia in Tuscaloosa. And so far, the game of the year by far. 41-34, the Crimson Tide was able to hold on to the lead and beat the visiting Bulldogs, ending their winning streak in conference, in the regular season, etc., but proving they are the best team in the country. In fact, looking at this game, I could say by watching all of the teams so far this season, they may be the two top teams in the country. Is that taking anything away from Texas? Yes, taking it away from Texas, because even though Texas did go on the road, and even though Texas did take on Michigan on the road, and they did beat Michigan on the road, they did not do anything in the stratosphere against the type of talent that was on the field tonight in Tuscaloosa when Georgia and Alabama got together. You're talking about minor league football. We're talking about the NFL draft, a plethora of NFL draft picks on one field tonight. And boy, did they deliver from the beginning till the end. Now, if you listen to Bias and I during our Sports Bags Bro podcast from Monday and Thursday, you would know how I felt about going into this game. Bias and I did pick Alabama to win. They were an underdog in this game, surprisingly to he and I. But looking at this game and watching it and how it played out, going into the game, I picked Alabama. What reason? The reason was I did not believe in Carson Beck. And guess what? I do not believe in Carson Beck today for one half, because in the second half, he finally showed what I thought that missing element was. Forget the 3 picks at the end of the day. He finally showed those things I thought he needed to show in terms of the elements of being that leader, being that talent they kept talking about. The guy I saw in high school that I thought was a good player, but is he the caliber of player that needs to go to Alabama or Georgia? It's a resounding yes. He deserves to be at Georgia. And if he chose to go to Alabama or any other major school, he would be there as well. He showed up big time. It took him some time to get started, but if this is the turning point in which he's going to move on from here until the end of the season, Georgia may not lose again, because if he's only going to get better from here on out, forget it about it. All bets are off. If he plays any way like he did from the second half on for the rest of the season, Georgia still has that realistic, very realistic chance of winning the national championship. A damn good player, regardless. And you can join the conversation if you want. I'll put the link in the description or the link in the chat, and you want to come in, you can either write a comment or do what you do. And as I can see right now, it is Bias that put his name up in the bid. And let's see what he said. Bama almost choked it away, but they responded. You know what? It would have been a choke. There's no other way around it, but then you still have to give credit where credit's due. Carson Beck is the reason why they would have choked it away. And would it have been more of Georgia being good enough and finally living up to expectation and getting themselves into the game to make it more competitive? Or was it just Alabama taking their foot off the gas and getting a little complacent and giving up the lead? I think it could be a little bit of both, but still, seeing the way Carson Beck performed in the second half of that game, that's the talent that you need to have. When things were desperate and on the road and all was up against him, you saw him respond. It's that simple. He responded in a huge way. And let me see. Oh, and yeah, of course, it says we've got to talk about Ryan Williams. Ryan Williams, the fantastic. I mean, you got to come better than that. If you're talking about him, you better come correct with your adjectives. You better. This guy, the way he played tonight and the way he's played so far this season as a 17-year-old, I'm going to tell you now, I've never seen anything like it in college football as a true freshman. When I first saw Michael Vick and I talked about how great he was when he was playing, he was a redshirt freshman. This is a guy who played football for high school just last year, graduated either last June or May, and now he's in not only in college football, he's on the highest level possible in college football, which I believe, and I don't think there are many people who could say otherwise, the SEC. Even though the Big Ten is the other conference, the SEC is so top heavy. And you saw two, if not two of the three teams that are at the top playing tonight. And he performed as a 17-year-old, absolutely dynamic, did everything you could want from a play like that. And I'll tell you another thing. There have been players who've come from Alabama in the past, especially at wide receiver, whether it's Devontae Adams or whether it's Julio Jones. You just talk about the types of players that have come from there, and you just know that the wide receivers that come out of there are just very good. But David Palmer was my number one wide receiver coming out of Alabama years ago. For people who follow Alabama or for people who know about the SEC, the deuce was loose. Number two, coming out of Birmingham, Alabama, all 5'9", 170 pounds of him, perhaps the best pound for pound wide receiver or even player at Alabama up until recently, because now they just have freaks of nature coming through. But if you knew the story of David Palmer, you would agree with me, or at least you would understand where I'm coming from and why I give him so much praise. He ended up being a second-round draft pick for the Minnesota Vikings when he finally did leave Alabama. But while he was there, and I knew people who knew him from high school, there were even more Paul Bunyan stories about him then. But anyway, we could take a few more of these questions or a few more of these comments that may be up here. Let's see. He predicted, Bias predicted 30-24, 41-34, more high scoring than he predicted, but the margin was close, which is true. And I expected a lower scoring game only because of the defenses involved. And of course, if I did not believe in Carson Beck that much, I would not have believed that he could push them as far as he did offensively for them to put up that many points. And it's not like I thought Alabama would put up a whole lot of points because, well, Georgia has a defense as well. But I thought, of course, they would win the game. And I thought maybe 30 points around there, 24 points, 27 points might have been where it needed to go. But 21-0 by the second quarter, I mean, that was insane, right? The 21-0 in the first quarter. And it reminded me, believe it or not, of back when Alabama did play Utah in the Sugar Bowl. And Utah got up to that 21-0 lead. They ultimately won 31-17. Beating Alabama in the Sugar Bowl, a huge surprise. But either way, this team tonight, certainly not like those teams in the past. We're talking about possibly seeing the two best teams in college football, and one of them or both could possibly be representing in the national championship game when it's all said and done. This could be the first salvo in the trilogy between these two teams, because we still have an SEC championship game in which these two may appear. And then after that, they still may appear in the championship game. So you're talking about a possible 3 times these two teams may meet up. We're not taking anything, or I'm not taking anything away from Texas. Texas is very good. And even with their injuries, they're proven to be very good today. They were very good once more. Arch Manning still putting up the numbers. The team still winning the way they've been winning, even without Quinn Ewers. And whether he comes back or not, I guess it's incidental because he's a Heisman Trophy candidate and Arch Manning is a Heisman Trophy candidate. So I don't know how it's going to work out. It's a great problem to have, but really is it? Because even though people smile in front of the camera, are they really that happy for one another behind closed doors when they're vying for the same spot? And in Quinn Ewers' case, you're talking about someone who has an NFL future next season, as opposed to Arch Manning, who has time on his hands and he could stay the entire time because he's not pressed for cash like a lot of players. Either way, this is what we're talking about here. And let me see. Well, we have Jermaine Drake up here. What a hell of an ending of the Bulldogs tie game. That's what I'm talking about. It's a hell of an ending between these two teams. And how is there like really anything else to talk about? I'm trying to put this link in the comments for people who may want to come in and talk, may want to join the chat. Go ahead and do so. But either way, a fantastic game. Huge numbers in these games. 34-41, 41-34. No matter how you look at it, the numbers were there tonight. And a spectacular game, a game that seemed like it might have been over in the very beginning, as early as the first quarter or even second quarter, only for Alabama to give up the lead, not because they sat back and gave up and tried not to lose. It was because Georgia found the desire, and finally Carson Beck showed that he could play, that he can almost make you forget about Stetson Bennett, if not for those championships. And that's something I mentioned on Thursday. He hasn't done enough to make you forget about Stetson Bennett, not Stetson Bennett's championships. They were both on the same team, but we knew who the star of the show was at the quarterback position. He showed that he had the intangibles. He had the moxie and intelligence to go along with the physical gifts. The accuracy got better as the time went on. He wasn't thrown behind players anymore. He was putting it right by the face mask, right in the numbers. Players were making plays. And because of Carson Beck, not because of anyone else. So give credit where credit's due. You probably won't hear me say too much about Carson Beck negatively, and it wasn't being deliberately negative. I was just going by what I had seen since the season started and even last year. I was wondering last season, why were they giving him so much credit when he wasn't really doing anything that stood out, other than being the quarterback of a team looking for a three-peat? And even going into this season, he was a Heisman Trophy candidate, in my opinion, because he was on the number one team in the country in the preseason. They're number two now and not there anymore, but they probably might not drop out of the top 5 with the movement that's happened today anyways, with Ole Miss losing to Kentucky and Oxford, one of the biggest surprise of the day, and the way this game turned out. It may be a big surprise just because Alabama was able to, Georgia was able to come back against Alabama and look as good as they had looked. So that's just as surprising. If you were it's a 4-quarter game, we already know that. But if you were looking at from the beginning till the halftime, come on, all bets were pretty much off to getting the ending that we ultimately had gotten. That's what we're talking about. That's what I'm talking about, at least. So once again, if you're in here, you could probably hit the link if you want to and come in. You don't have to cam up. You can probably just speak from there if you can, if you want. Or you can just comment in the comments and we'll move on from there. Because that wasn't the only thing that happened in college football. It was just seemingly the best thing that happened in college football today. And it lived up to the expectations. It lived up to what I was thinking in terms of saying this college football game was the biggest football game played probably this season up to this point between college and pro. Because this early in the NFL season, there isn't really that much. I don't know. You could lose even now, especially with one more game added, 17 games to a season. You could probably go 0-3, 0-4, and still end up in the playoffs if you hit your stride at the right time. There's time to do it. But as Bayer said when we were doing the show, by week 8, 9, and 10, you know what? You're running out of time to try to turn it around. And if you hadn't, it's over. But we're talking this early in the season, week 5 for college football, and we're not even adding the 0 week there, and week 4 for the NFL. This was the biggest and probably most important game of the football season so far right now. And it lived up to expectations. I don't think it could not have lived up to expectations, but when it started off and Alabama was up as high as they were, you couldn't help but think this was going to be a washout, but you had to bide your time. And if you've been a college football fan or a sports fan for however long, you knew that you just had to wait it out. And Alabama and Georgia always bringing the fireworks, even though Alabama continuously constantly beats them, just beat them in the SEC championship game last year, and a de facto home game in Atlanta, all of that. So, but hey, this Week 5 did not just begin now. Week 5 began last Thursday and Friday, and it led to right now. I can go down a list of games that have been played, even though this Georgia-Alabama game is going to overshadow anything that had been done in college football, including the games that are still being played right now on the West Coast that hadn't finished. You just, come on. But we got to give credit where credit is due. Week 5, more than one team played. We know more than two teams, more than one game has been played. So let's go through it as we do every week. If you want to join the conversation, go ahead in the comments and click the link or just leave a comment. And one of the games I wanted to talk about out of a lot of games that have been played this past week, this past Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, Rutgers and Washington got together. They got together in Piscataway, New Jersey, as Rutgers was an undefeated team. And after the game was over, they were still an undefeated team. They beat Washington, the Huskies. They tried to blow the game themselves, but they ended up winning 21-18. Even though Washington had 521 yards of total offense, that Rutgers defense bent but did not break. And now they continue on with their undefeated ways. Greg Schiano, in his second tenure with the team, is now undefeated with this Rutgers team. And one thing I talked about a while ago, and even the first time he was the coach with Rutgers, was how he went about recruiting. You know, he used to be the defensive coordinator for the University of Miami, and he would recruit down in Miami like a lot of teams and a lot of coaches do throughout the country. They come to the fertile land of Florida and they pick up their players and they take them throughout the country. And most times you get a better program because of it, because those are such elite players. But this time around, he has gotten his players from the state of Florida, but not as many. The last time I checked, he had 12 players from the state of Florida on his roster. The rest of them he's pretty much getting from Jersey, which is a hidden gem of college football players, or even their high school football programs are pretty elite programs that no one really talks about. The Garden State, when you look at the teams, Bergen Catholic, or you look at Don Bosco Prep, pretty good schools in that little area of New Jersey, pretty good players that come out of it. And he's now able to get those top players to stay home for the most part. You know, you go back to Chris Sims and when he played at Ramapo High School in Jersey, and he was the number one quarterback in the country. And not because he was Phil Sims' son. He was the top quarterback in the country. He chose Tennessee, changed his mind, ended up going to Texas, had a pretty solid career there. Not as great as people were expecting, but it was a solid career, enough to get him drafted and ultimately play for the Denver Broncos, where he got injured. I think he had that broken sternum. The whole deal happened. But anyway, going back to New Jersey players and what Greg Schiano was doing, getting those players and cherry picking the Philadelphia area, which has pretty damn good football players. Every now and then going to the New York City area, but primarily the New York State area, Syracuse, Albany, those areas to get players. And then going out west and getting some of these Ohio players. And not the singing group, but the Ohio players. And they're coming together, and he's able to put a solid program together because of it. And Kyle Managai, he's one of those players I talked about before, as far as being a Heisman Trophy candidate. He's the running back for Rutgers. He had 132 yards. I looked at him as a Heisman Trophy candidate going into the season. Well, it doesn't look like he's going to be a Heisman Trophy winner, but he surely will be a possible first-round draft pick, even though running backs have been devalued over the years in the NFL. So you have to be really, really special as a running back to go in the first round, you know, or be thought to be special like Bijan Robinson was a couple of years ago, or Jahmyr Gibbs, an undersized running back, but a dynamic dual threat running back catching out of the backfield and being able to go through between the tackles on occasion, but certainly a spark plug of a player. But this is what I'm talking about. Kyle Managai has that ability to be a first rounder one day. Now, in my opinion, in terms of running backs, it has to be Ashton Jeanty right now, the best running back in the country for Boise State, still averaging over double digits per carry. He's just been an absolutely ridiculous running back so far. In fact, tonight he's run again broke some big yards already tonight doing his thing. So Ashton Jeanty, a Jacksonville, Florida guy who happened to play his high school ball in Texas. So either way, that Florida blood going over to one of the other powerhouse high school football playing areas, showing what he can do up at Boise State. In fact, we're at a point right now where they're talking as if, with the transfer portal being what it is, if he did decide to come back next season, he wouldn't be at Boise State. I'm thinking that he's going to go to the NFL because there's no reason to sit back. There just isn't. Oh my God. This, come on, man. Doing all this yelling and screaming today at these games, you get a little thirsty and all that crap. So let's go through the names. Now, if you're looking at the Rutgers-Washington game, I already mentioned how Rutgers was able to continue their undefeated record for the year. Surprisingly, in some people's opinion, because they did take on the Washington Huskies, but these ain't your daddy's Washington Huskies from last year. We saw the daddy of that team. He coaches at Alabama now. That's Kalen DeBoer. So it's not the same program anymore. But nevertheless, Rutgers gets the win. You can't take it from 21-18. They move on. I don't know who they're playing next. I'll check out the schedule. But anyways, before this game that we saw today became as huge as it is after it's been played, there was another huge controversial game just yesterday on Friday as the number 7 Miami Hurricanes took on the Virginia Tech Hokies down in Miami at Hard Rock Stadium. And what a surprise that was. Myself, as a resident Miami Hurricane fan for decades, plural, I thought it would be an easy win because I saw what Virginia Tech had done against Vanderbilt in the beginning of the season, losing in Nashville. I saw what Rutgers had done to them in Blacksburg, of all places. They went to Blacksburg and beat them there. So I saw them and I thought, okay, this is just a down year because they were supposed to have been one of these teams that were the ACC surprise, and they just floundered. In fact, I believe the ACC surprise happens to be Boston College. And incidentally, when it came down to betting, I picked Boston College against Western Kentucky today, and there was a problem on the way. I picked it on Thursday, so there was a problem on the way to this actual bet on Saturday. Their quarterback, Thomas Castellanos, out. Castellanos is out. He was out injured. I don't think they even mentioned what he was injured or out for. He was out, and that didn't help anything. And so they ended up having to play without him, and they still won 21-20, but they did not cover. If you're going back to the gambling part of it, they did not cover. But in any event, Boston College won. But going back to this Miami-Virginia Tech game, Miami looked terrible. They looked bad. And I don't think they looked bad because of just looking bad. I think Virginia Tech had a lot to do with it. And Cam Ward, who was the number 1 Heisman Trophy candidate going into the game, and some people, if not most people's opinion, didn't look as good when he played against a defense that's now a conference game defense. There's one thing about college football, period, and it's this. You always recruit for your conference play. You don't recruit because of a big name team on the outside. You recruit your conference. You recruit because of conference play. You go after practically the same players and the same regions a lot of times. You'll cherry pick if you can, but you typically recruit for your conference, like in Michigan or Ohio State or Michigan State or any of the other Big Ten schools. They'll get these big, strong offensive linemen. They'll get these players who played in cold environments somewhere in the Midwest, maybe even in the Northeast, or maybe out in the greater Northwest, the great Northwest out west. They'll get players from those areas, but players who can play in that cold weather because they know at some point it's going to get cold, and sometimes bitter cold. Minnesota, Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, you already know how it is. And so just like here in the South, when you're in the swamp, or you're in Miami, or you're in Florida State, or even Central Florida or South Florida in Tampa, then you get a lot of players from that area because they know how to handle the heat. And there was a reason why a lot of these players who were from the South, when they played teams in the North or at a certain temperature point, they weren't getting wins. Now, how true was it? Or how much did it really have to do with the weather or just lack of talent, I don't know, but it was a nice stat when I saw it. But in any event, Miami went into this game as an 18.5 point favorite. It was bet down to 18. I think at one point it was even 17.5. They go into this game and they looked like they were going to get the job done, but it stopped right away as Virginia Tech matched them man for man. And Cam Ward, he had 343 yards. He had his 4 touchdowns. He had 2 interceptions. And he didn't look as confident or as calm as he typically looks when he's playing. Damian Martinez, our big running back who came from Oregon State to Miami at 230 pounds, decides he wants to dance instead of hitting the line and using his natural speed to get from point A to B. This is a destructive game. We need him to be destructive. He doesn't want to do that. And then you have to placate him because he did come from Oregon State and chose Miami. You have to placate him by giving him the ball more than you probably should, almost to the point in which it's becoming detrimental to the team because he's not getting the yards you need from a big guy like that. Mark Fletcher, as big as he is, can do an even better job. He's less hesitant or doesn't dance as much when he gets the ball. And so you can go down and down the list, but Miami didn't look good. The offensive line looked terrible. The defense could not tackle anybody as Bashul Tootin just ran right through the Canes at 141 yards for the game. He was just going through them. And the Virginia Tech offense as a whole ran for 206 yards on the ground. Kyron Drones, the quarterback for Virginia Tech, not necessarily a good quarterback, but against Miami, he's good. He's decent. He's making plays. And I guess it still goes back to that conference play I've been talking about. Conference play is different than just any other big game you might get up with for a one-off. Conference games are much more competitive, as you saw tonight between Alabama and Georgia. They played other teams in the conference. Georgia in particular played Kentucky and just got by Kentucky 13-12 when they played them in Lexington. And they just happen to have a tough game in Lexington every time they play them, regardless of the disparity in talent between Kentucky and Georgia. They just have a hard time with them when they're in Lexington. Conference play, recruiting the same kind of players, maybe not talent-wise, but just the same kind of players. The intensity level goes up a little bit more when you play against one of those teams or a team in your conference. But Miami did not look good, but they did escape with that 38-34 victory. But it did not come without controversy, as the Hail Mary that was never in control of by the receiver was called a touchdown initially and overturned after the boys and girls in Charlotte, the headquarters for the ACC, checked out the replay over and over and over, apparently for about 10 minutes before coming back with the final verdict of a reversed call, no touchdown for the Virginia Tech Hokies, leading a lot of non-Miami fans to getting upset, people bringing up conspiracy theories, the usual stuff you get in sports when things don't go the way you think they should go. All votes, all rules are out the window when it doesn't go your way. You know what? All rules, all things were out the window when I didn't get my way, when Terry Porter threw that flag in the Fiesta Bowl when Miami played Ohio State. Yeah, you know when that was. I didn't get my way there. I didn't like it. Still don't like it. But you live, you move on, and move. This game wasn't even that huge a game. So Miami pulled it off. A huge controversial win, but a win nonetheless. Now, I believe even at number 7, and even with Ole Miss being number 6 and losing, Miami either stays at 7 or they may even go down to 8 or 9 based on that win they had gotten, because it should have been more dominant for a team in the top 10. Now, I compare it to what Georgia had done when they did have that tough game on the road against Kentucky, who was blown out the previous week or during the season against South Carolina, blown out in Kentucky. Georgia just barely loses to the wins against them, and they did not drop too far. They dropped down to number 2, one spot. So keep that in mind when you're talking about fairness or anything that has to do with the Miami Hurricanes. Should they drop too far, or how far should they drop based on a close win, as controversial as it may have been. So we'll take it from there. And by the way, the Miami Hurricanes, if you want to talk about players who played well, Malik Bryant played lights out. As I mentioned, for Virginia Tech, Kyron Drones for his for what he's known for and what he had done on Friday night, completely night and day. He had a good night, 189 yards and 2 touchdowns passing. He threw his interception, but he was a certain force. He was a force. You had to watch the game. You couldn't just stat watch. You had to see how he had done it and how he had come about the stats he had gotten. Antoine Powell-Ryland, another one of those players that you need to talk about. So far, leading the nation in sacks as a defensive end. He played at the University of Florida. He's a transfer. As you know, the transfer portal brings in talent from everywhere. And he's just one of these players. He's from Virginia anyways. So he did go to Florida, left, went back into the portal, stayed closer to home. He's now in Blacksburg at Virginia Tech. He leads the nation in sacks. Now I believe with 6.5 or 7. But definitely he's the real deal. Because I've seen other defensive ends or defensive linemen or defensive players this season who were highly heralded because of their stats, and they don't necessarily live up to that status, even with the stats to back them up. One of those players is Jahvaree Ritzie. He's a defensive lineman from North Carolina. In the first 2 games of the season, he had 5 sacks. So anybody reasonable would have been led to believe that he would be one of those players you would hear about as the season went on as a dominant force on the North Carolina defense. Mack Brown is there, so you may have even thought about Julius Peppers, Ebenezer Ekuban, that crew from years ago that Mack Brown had that was dominant defensively. Dre Bry at the cornerback spot as a redshirt freshman with double-digit interceptions. I just remember all that stuff. But those are the only sacks he's had all season long. Now, on the other hand, I know when I was looking at Antoine Powell-Ryland, they call him APR. When I looked at him and I saw that he had 4 sacks in 1 game, that was against Old Dominion. You expect for him to get something like that or close to it against a school like Old Dominion, not necessarily a powerhouse. And Old Dominion is also another Virginia school, so you have that little Virginia rivalry thing going on. For some reason, whether it's Old Dominion or even Norfolk State, when those two get together, they play a little differently against one another. But Antoine Powell-Ryland, former Gator, now at Virginia Tech, leads the nation in sacks. Jahvaree Ritzie, who I talked about from North Carolina with 5 sacks in the first 2 games, has been MIA ever since, even against North Carolina Central and HBCU. So the numbers matter to a degree, but you have to be consistent and you got to be as dominant as the numbers say. And for me, Ritzie isn't, and Powell-Ryland is. So that's the game. Miami, number 7 Miami, at least for the moment, beats Virginia Tech in a controversial ending, at least 38-34. It shouldn't have even been that close, even though Miami did put up 508 yards of total offense. That's beside the point. If you want to be looked at as respectable, if you want to be looked at as the old school Miami Hurricanes, the dominant force they used to be, you got to be as dominant as they were. And what's been going on with this team, even the other games they've played, I think they've been dominant like they should have been. But this team is good. It's not special. Special is what we saw tonight between Georgia and Alabama in terms of the talent coming together and having a special team. Georgia is special. Alabama is special. Texas is special. Maybe even Ohio State. The jury is still out on them, but Miami isn't special. They're good. And I probably wouldn't even venture to say very good until we see more of them against teams that really matter. And the way they played yesterday, if they continue to play that way in the ACC, especially next week when they take on Cal in California, a cross-country trip to play the Cal Bears, who only have 1 loss, they have to really show up for it. So we'll see. And the ACC isn't that dominant this year anyway, so Miami has the easy route, if you want to call it that. So they got to show and prove that they can hang and do what the elite teams are doing. Right now, Miami is not elite. They have players. They're getting more players, but they aren't elite. Hey, things happen with the camera. So other games that have been played, number one Texas, as I mentioned, played against Mississippi State. They win the game 35-13. Another game in which Arch Manning is your quarterback and not Quinn Ewers, who is still out, injured, hasn't been cleared to play, at least not yet. So they're winning anyway. Why not just let Arch continue to get that experience that he's going to need when Ewers does leave? They were a 38.5-point favorite in this game against Mississippi State, and they did not cover. Now, is that important? Not necessarily, but Mississippi State might have gotten up for this game more so than they get up for other games, and they see the line. Don't believe these athletes, whether pro or college or anyone else who tells you that they don't care about the line. They don't pay attention to the line. I've dealt with athletes in the past who told me the same thing, but guess what? When they end up beating a team that they were the big underdogs to, they'll tell you about that. See, we beat them. Everybody was against us. Everybody was against us. See, they had us as the 15-point underdog. Exactly, because you look at the number. Don't say you don't, because you do. You'll say the cliche, we don't let the media tell us what to do, or we don't listen to it, or we don't read the newspapers. This day and age, you read the newspapers if they're available, and you read everything online. And you go to the chat rooms and fight and go back and forth on social media with these people who don't see things the way you see them. So, yeah, so that's another one of those things. But Texas, number one team in the country, they hadn't done anything to lose that number one ranking. They deserve to be number one. But I'm sure after this game tonight between Georgia and Alabama's going to get a lot of first place votes. In fact, they may jump over Ohio State. So we'll see how that turns out as well, even though Ohio State is playing well and dominating the team they should be dominating. It's just that the team they played so far aren't on the same level as what just happened tonight between Alabama and Georgia. And the 522 yards, Texas just throws up a bunch of yards, 522 yards total tonight. Manning threw 324 yards, 2 touchdowns. You just look at it and see how it happens. They had 6 sacks. They were just all over the place. Colin Simmons had 2 sacks. Just a dominant performance. You just throw those numbers out there because there's really nothing else to really say, because they were expected to win pretty comfortably, even more so with 38.5 being the line, at least according to Vegas. But and they did exactly that, not covering the line, but winning comfortably and putting the line up, putting the numbers up that they did. And that's how Texas continues to be number one, and they should be number one when Monday comes. Now, the huge game I think that people talked about today, I think the biggest loss, at least, or biggest win outside of this Georgia-Alabama game, which was the biggest football game period this week or even this season so far, pro or college, is the Kentucky-Ole Miss game. Yes, Kentucky and Ole Miss got together today, and Ole Miss at home in Oxford, they lost 20-17, and that's pretty damn surprising because they came into the game as the number 6 team in the country. They came into the game with the number 1 offense in the country, the number 1 passing offense in the country. Jackson Dart was throwing darts. And then Kentucky comes in, makes it ugly like they did against Georgia and Lexington, makes it ugly now in Oxford, and they just stole one. Give Mike Stoops credit through the wazoo once again. Mike Stoops knows how to get his boys up for games like that. Apparently, it was an ugly game, but someone had to win. Brock Vandagriff, the quarterback for Kentucky, shows up, plays very well. In fact, as you know, if you don't know, he was the backup quarterback, I think 3rd-string quarterback at Georgia before transferring to Kentucky. And he was in the same recruiting class as Jackson Dart. So you see all of these players, they kind of know one another, or they came up together. They were probably ranked in the same bubble as elite quarterbacks as high school players, or in the top 50 or 100, whatever you call them. But yeah, these are elite quarterbacks. And now that the transfer portal allows them to go from place to place, outside of their original commitment, well, they might end up at a theater near you someday, at a school near you. But Brock Vandagriff played very well today for what you could expect. And if you watch the game, as I did watch the game, he was annoying. I mean, not annoying in terms of just being a pain in the butt, but annoying because if you did not think that they were going to win, which I didn't, and which a lot of people didn't think they were going to win, he was just throwing a monkey wrench in all of the works that you put out there. You think that, okay, Lane Kiffin is finally going to get it together, or the defense is finally going to figure him out, and they didn't. He ran the ball, even though he's not a runner. He just knows when to run, even without being a runner. He throws the ball capably enough, and we saw how that turned out. I mean, he did have 243 yards. He didn't need a whole lot of touchdowns. He only had one. But at the end of the game, they also had the victory, and they knocked off the number 6 team in the country. And that's where we stand now. Brock Vandagriff from Georgia wins an ugly game, just like the ugly game they almost won in Lexington against Georgia, 13-12. They lost 13-12 in this one. But yeah, they kept Jackson Dart and Ole Miss to 10% on third downs. 1 out of 10, 10%, one conversion. And that's how you get that kind of a score. That's how you disrupt the number 1 offense and number 1 passing game in the country. They also got 4 sacks, so they just got after it. I mean, they really did. You know, Jackson Dart just couldn't throw his darts. He had his 261 yards, but everything seemed pushed and forced and desperate when he was doing it or going about it. So let's see what other games we have on the list. Okay, if you want to talk about Auburn and Oklahoma, number 21 Oklahoma. Auburn was up 20, I mean, they were just looking good for instance. You know, they were looking good. They were up 21-10 in the fourth quarter. I finally thought that Peyton Thorne would look like a real quarterback, and he did for the majority of the game until he throws the interception. I mean, come on. He throws the interception, a pick 6 at that, to Kip Lewis, and they lose. They lose the game. They were outscored 17-7 in the fourth quarter. They blow the lead at home. Hugh Freeze, I don't know what's going on, the brain freeze, or is it a Peyton Thorne thing? Because Peyton Thorne has been a pretty bad quarterback all year. I thought this would be a game that he would be another bad quarterback, but he turned out to do pretty well. But still found a way to blow it by throwing a pick 6 that cost them the game. And, well, as they say, War Eagle and Oklahoma, they win. I mean, nothing to it. I didn't think too much of Oklahoma this season anyways. And I didn't think too much of Oklahoma for years. Even when Big Choke Bob was there, I wasn't so big on the Oklahoma bandwagon. I used to like Oklahoma when Barry Switzer was there, but not since. So, what other games have happened? You know, there's a game out there that, well, there are several games, but there's a game in particular that I wanted to talk about, and because I've talked about them before, and I happen to know a few things about them, and that's UNLV, the Rebels, no longer the Running Rebels. They are just the Rebels. And the reason why I even bring this up is because if you've been on any kind of sports news over the past couple of days, Matt Sluka, their quarterback, ended up leaving because of an NIL discrepancy. He says he was promised $100,000 to come to the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. He gets there, and then they tell him, oh, well, we'll give you $3,000 a month for about 4 months. Well, that's a shortfall of $88,000. He was guaranteed money, he said. So based on that reneging of the contract, or reneging of the verbal contract, I guess that was said, he decided to walk away from the team. And he walks away. So you think there's going to be a bunch of chaos on the team, and there probably is. But what happens? UNLV ends up beating Fresno State 59-14. I know it's later on in the season, but this is the same Fresno State team that Michigan had their issues with earlier in the season. But UNLV now 4-0. I talked about when they were 3-0. The first time since 1984 they were 3-0. And that season they went 11-2 for the season. And they ended up having all of their wins taken away because of an ineligible player or players. So they were 0-13 when it was said and done. They won the California Bowl that year against Toledo. And they had Ickey Woods and Randall Cunningham on that team. So that was a very good team. In fact, they also had the wins from the previous season taken away from 1983 and 84 because of that. But anyways, this UNLV team, because their quarterback felt that he was done wrong, he just walks away from the team. And you would think that it would cause turmoil, and it did from a PR standpoint, but from a playing standpoint, apparently, we're talking UNLV here. We're not talking about a top-tier school in terms of college football, not even basketball anymore. Talk is gone. It's been gone. But UNLV beats Fresno 59-14, which is pretty surprising. I thought with this kind of chaos going on, all of this mess that's going on behind the scenes, that they probably would get distracted and this would be some kind of a trap game. I think the line on the game was 2.5. So I think Vegas even got the point on that. But they showed they were able to put it to the side and do well. Hajj-Malik Williams was their quarterback. He steps in as next man up, and he throws for 182 yards and 3 touchdowns. He completes 81% of his passes, and they win. He contributed directly to that 59-14 victory. Matt Sluka, if you saw him play, he wasn't that good. He had 6 touchdowns, I believe, with 1 interception, but if you watched him, he wasn't that good. He came from Holy Cross. How good was he supposed to be? I see, and this lets you know that the transfer portal isn't just for the 4- or 5-star players or just for big school players. Small school players can go to other schools. You can have top flight players at smaller schools that can fit in a bigger school. It's kind of like a second recruitment. Maybe you've matured at that school. Now you're ready for the big time. And I think to a degree, in this case, Hajj-Malik Williams, the quarterback who had taken over for Matt Sluka, was that guy. He's a Georgia player, played in the high school system there, Atlanta area, and he wasn't really recruited by a lot of players because he had poor grades. So he ended up going to, I believe, Virginia Military Academy. And from there, I think Georgia Tech was interested, but he decided to go to Campbell University, the Fighting Camels, if you know about them. I think they're known more for their basketball team only because just a few years ago, about 5-6 years ago, Chris Clemens, the leading scorer in college basketball that year, averaging over 30 points a game, he came from there. He came from Campbell University, the Fighting Camels. Undrafted, but still made the Houston Rockets team for a little while. Now he's out there doing whatever he's doing now. He's not in the NBA, but he's playing somewhere. But anyway, as a point of reference, but going back to Hajj-Malik Williams, he came from Atlanta, ended up going to Campbell, rejuvenated their program, but then COVID came around. And they kind of fell back. You know, they had that season, I believe, in the spring, and things kind of were awkward as you would expect. And the team kind of fell back down through their losing ways. And he transferred, and here he is at UNLV, and he got a chance to shine, and he shined just the other day. I don't know if it's a one-off, but talent-wise, he may just be there. And I remember just thinking about where he was when he was at Campbell. The coach there, up until last season at least, was Mike Minter. And for you college football fans, or especially Nebraska fans, Mike Minter was with the Nebraska Cornhuskers when they won their 2 national championships. Well, he was on that back-to-back national championship team in the 90s. So Mike Minter was the head coach over at Campbell University. Surprise, surprise. Now, I don't believe he's there now. I think he left last season. But anyways, he had Hajj-Malik Williams, and Hajj-Malik had a great game for his standards and apparently for UNLV as they won 59-14. So I just thought I'd bring that up because of the Matt Sluka nonsense. And now Hajj-Malik Williams, next man up, seems to be the better man up. That's how it seems, at least for this game. Now UNLV is 4-0. So the tumultuous outside events hasn't gotten to them yet, if at all. Going by the numbers, if you just looked at the numbers, Sluka didn't add anything to the team anyway. Nothing significant. It looks like they could win even better without him. So we'll see as the season continues to go on and UNLV continues to play. We'll see how much better they get, how much better they are. And so there are other games on the list that we probably may want to talk about in this. I'm not going to call it a truncated version because I don't know how long these shows are going to last. I just throw them up there and we're going to talk about them. And that's that. So let me see. USC, Wisconsin. That's another one of these games. USC coming off of a loss against Michigan in the Big House last week. A game I thought they would have won or should have won. They were 5-point favorites, and I took them because I believe they could go into the Big House and win based on how Texas was able to handle Michigan, even though it was early in the season. But even though Michigan's offense isn't what it was last year, and you cannot expect it, as the entire offensive line is gone and their quarterback is gone, they have their running backs to a degree. Blake Corum is gone, but they do have Donovan Edwards, and now they have Khalil Mullins, the former linebacker and special teamer, as their leading rusher now and their most reliable rusher. But defense is what I just dismissed, and I should not have done that. The defense is a solid defense, but their offense, run by Alex Orji, is stagnant at best. They're just not a good offense. And if Mullins isn't making it happen, he just got a third 100-plus yard game today. But if you find a way to stop him, it really diminishes their chances of doing anything offensively and ultimately winning a game. And in this game, USC, 13 in the country, Wisconsin came in 2 time zones over there in the Central Time Zone, going over to the Pacific. And they put up a good game at the beginning. But then in the second half, something happened. USC scored 28 points and they didn't score any. They outscored them 28-0 in the second half. Miller Moss ends up throwing for 308 yards. And I know I watched the beginning of the game. He wasn't looking sharp. I don't know if he was looking distracted or if they were doing something different that he just wasn't used to seeing. But he wasn't looking like I had seen him in the past. It's not like he had done anything extraordinary. I just thought he was very steady and reliable. And after being in the system as long as he has, steady and reliable is what you would expect. Anyways, he threw for 308 yards. He threw for 3 touchdowns, only threw 1 pick. And Braden Locke didn't look so bad himself, taking over for the broken down and now out for the season former Miami Hurricane Tyler Van Dyke. Incidentally, Braden Locke, last week he was 13. Last week he was 13-26. Today he's 13 for 26, but 180 yards, 1 touchdown in the pick. So he's still getting his feet wet in terms of trying to start. And it's a rough go when you're going on the road, especially out west with these time zones involved and playing against a pretty sharp and good USC team on the road. And USC took care of the business they were supposed to have taken care of, and they won 38-21. So, yes, USC still in the mix. I don't know if I could call them a very good team or just a good team. I think they're just a good team or decent team right now. And we'll get a chance to see as these games continue, especially now that they're in the Big Ten. So a game we can talk about now is because it's interesting, and it's Nebraska. Nebraska took on Purdue, and they ended up winning the game 28-10. And anytime Nebraska plays today, you think about Dominic. You might as well think about Dominic because you talk about his son, Dylan Raiola, 244 yards, 1 touchdown. You look at those numbers, and some people might, they're pretty average numbers, but you completely missed the point of him being a true freshman quarterback and not understanding how difficult it is for a true freshman to come into college in any capacity, let alone Division 1A, and move the needle at all. And if they move it with consistency, we see DJ Lagway for the University of Florida. He has flashes, but even, and Mertz is there, but still, when he does get his opportunities, he shows flashes, and there's no real consistency there. And I know he's not there long enough to get that consistency, but Dylan Raiola is there all the time. He's taking the beatings when there are beatings to be taken, and he's looking good when he can look good. And throughout all of this, he has to learn during the process, all of the good, bad, and the ugly, everything in between. And he's doing that. He's taking the good with the bad. He has no choice. He's the starter. He's the starting quarterback. He has that pedigree, though. He has that mentality, and he has the talent to match it. And now one lost Nebraska is moving another step further. with a true freshman quarterback who they should have, if all works out perfectly. Thinking he's a legacy player is good enough, but Bo Nix was also a legacy player at Auburn who ended up at Oregon. So you can't take anything for granted these days. I would like to think Dylan wouldn't do that, but hey, I don't know what the story was with Bo Nix and Auburn to the point to where he was going to leave and go to Oregon, whatever. But I do know that Dylan Raiola is doing good things for Nebraska, and I don't see any reason why they wouldn't give him whatever the hell he wants if there was a problem between he wanted to leave or stay. But they did get the win, 28-10. Emmett Johnson on the ground ran for just 50 yards. This is a Nebraska team that gets more yards in the air than the ground. You just don't think too much about Nebraska when that does happen. But they did get 5 sacks so that Nebraska defense still gets after you. And even though Purdue isn't one of these elite teams, and this is probably one of their worst teams in a couple of years. I've seen them have pretty solid teams. This is one of their worst teams, but you still have to play the games. And it was still a home game for them. And it is still a true freshman who came and ran the offense. And they pulled it off in Purdue and West Lafayette. And Nebraska's still a one-loss team. Skip it along. Big Ten play. Let's see how it all goes. I know the young kids still has a bunch of lessons to learn, and there are a lot of top teams who would like to teach it to them. I don't know about their schedule, but those big names are on their list. You can't escape them. So we'll have to wait and see. And let me see. The game, another game that's of interest that you have to talk about is, look, Colorado played UCF. Colorado beat UCF 48-21. And if you watch the show that Bias and I do, the podcast we do on Monday and Thursday, you've heard me say things about Colorado. Not necessarily things about Coach Prime, but more about Shedeur, because I've seen Shedeur before all of this became a thing. I've seen him when he was at Jackson State. Not because Deion Sanders was there, but because I've covered HBCU football for decades. So I knew about him as a player. I knew about his struggles against North Carolina Central, his struggles with South Carolina State, the Celebration Bowl. And then as he moved on and saw how things started off last year with Colorado, and now the way he's playing now, all bets are off. Sometimes you get so caught up in looking at a player like him and looking for reason to complain, even though he may rub you the wrong way, you don't like his personality. But I didn't think he was living up to the expectations, and the things that I was seeing just wasn't commensurate with what people were telling me was happening. But now today, after seeing him, and I haven't really watched the whole game with him in some time now, this guy is a legitimate Division I quarterback, and he is a legitimate first-round draft pick. I don't know about first pick overall and all of that nonsense, but he is a legitimate NFL talent, and he is a legitimate first-round draft pick quarterback. This guy, and he did it from what I saw today. He did it more. He did more in a game that didn't have 400-plus yards throwing and all this other nonsense. He did it in a game in which he was under control. He was on the road, and you can't say, well, it's just UCF. No, it was UCF, and they were supposed to lose to UCF. People who know about football, or at least the betting part of it more than you and I, they thought 14.5 points or 13.5 points was the line for this game, that they should have lost to the University of Central Florida because of that. And Shedeur was a huge reason, but he was the huge reason why, because he's the quarterback. He's the one with the ball in his hands every time, along with the center. The player, of course, if I had to pick a Heisman Trophy candidate who should win, and if they are in the lead right now, it would be Travis Hunter. Cam Ward from Miami was up there because of the smoke and mirrors and because he did some good things and because I'm a Canes fan and all that bias that might come with that. But he's not on the same level as a talent as Travis Hunter. Travis Hunter, without a doubt, is the most talented individual in football because he's playing in college football, because he's playing on a high level at multiple positions. And if you added another position, he could do the same. He could do kickoff returns. He could do the punt returns. He is an elite corner. He is a very good receiver. He has all of that going for him. No one else could do it. When Charles Woodson won it as a defensive player, he did spot duty as a kickoff returner, maybe wide receiver, but not like Travis. Travis Hunter plays like all the time. His conditioning is through the roof. You would think that he goes out to Colorado or some high altitude area to practice during the off season to be ready for this kind of load he gets. And then he's in Colorado anyway. So he probably does. And he had his ability is unmatched in college football right now. He's as close to what Deion Sanders, I guess, was when Deion was playing, or even Bo Jackson in terms of, well, he did two sports, so I'm not going to even talk about that. He did two sports. But in terms of an overall pure athlete, Travis Hunter is a top 5 NFL draft pick. I think he probably likely is going to play corner in the NFL, because why would he go with receiver, get banged up, and then try to go as a cornerback? The NFL is a completely different game than the college game. And even on this level, he's not playing in the SEC or even the Big Ten. He's playing in the Big 12. And there is a drop-off. Let's not act like there isn't. In my opinion, there's the SEC, then there's the Big 10, and then there's the Big 12. And his team, as it seems right now, may be middling with the Big 12, or even if they're in the top quarter of the Big 12, it's still not the same talent as the Big 10 and the SEC. But I think he'll do what he's doing regardless. He has that kind of talent. And wow, time just flies when you're trying to have fun. Anyone who comes in here, you can come in here and join the conversation, be able to comment in here, or you can hit the link and join live. You don't necessarily have to come up and cam up, but you can join the conversation nonetheless. And that brings me to, let's see, I don't even have a list. I'm kind of like bullet pointing all over. Notre Dame and Louisville. Notre Dame beats Louisville. Number 16, Notre Dame beats Louisville, 31-24. So Notre Dame scored 21 points in the first quarter. Riley Leonard, what's with this guy? Is he somebody special, or is he supposed to be special? You bring him in the same way you bring in Sam Hartman, and you're expecting big things. Sam Hartman at least gave you some big things early, but then he proved not to be as good as advertised or expected. And he kind of went by the wayside. Riley Leonard was supposed to have been better, and he's not. I mean, he's not doing anything. 163 yards. I mean, and you know what? And it's not always about the yards. It's when you get the yards and how you get them, when it matters. And they did win it, and it was at home. But Notre Dame only had 280 yards of total offense at home. They were 2 for 10 on third down, just 20%. So what is he really doing for that offense? And when you start playing the big dogs, if you play the big dogs, I think even right now, USC would be a problem for Notre Dame, no matter where they play. I'm not even going to talk about what Texas, what Ohio State, or Alabama or Georgia would do. Maybe even LSU. LSU is not that top tier team in the SEC. They're kind of like trying to teeter on top of that one quarter right now. They're at the bottom of the quarter, I guess, or even bottom of the third. But regardless, Notre Dame is the same old Notre Dame. We'll have to see when they finally play a team with a pulse and see how these quarterbacks really do. We found out later on with Sam Hartman as the competition got tough. We saw it last year against Ohio State and Notre Dame, and Sam Hartman's true colors showed, even though I thought he was better than what he was, and he turned out not to be. But yeah, that's a game. They did win. Notre Dame beat Louisville, number 5, and how good is Louisville really? Was anybody expecting anyone from the ACC to do well except for Miami? And only because Miami has the groceries, and now Cristobal is trying to be the chef with all of these expensive groceries, but the transfer portal, NIL, and John Woo is being the big backer of the Miami Hurricanes, the billionaire down there, putting this thing together. Yeah, but anyway, I had to mention Notre Dame because they are part of the list as well. Well, that'll be it for tonight as time continues to click on by. The amazing game between Alabama and Georgia, over spectacular game, 41-34. Everybody enjoyed it. If you're not a Georgia Bulldog fan, I do know some Georgia Bulldog fans. I do know some Georgia Bulldog employees who are not happy with it, especially after the special text I sent them right after the last second was melted off of the clock. And I may hear about it later, but another story for another day. And it may be a funny story. It may be a wet, drenched, covered day like it is most times in Florida during hurricane season. So I'm Trav, and typically with the Sports Bag Bros podcast, along with Bias, Monday to Thursday. But this is the college football review with you, week 5, coming to an end. So maybe next week when we get this done, you may want to join it because I may do it a little earlier. This week I did it this late only to make sure that the big game was done with. That way everyone could have watched the big game and then comment later. But as you see, not too many comments today. No harm, no foul. Trav speaking to you once again, and deuces.